everybody. Welcome to the Daily Scream with Cake Drain. I'm Drake.
And I'm Kane.
We're Cake Drain. This is our first podcast. Hope you guys enjoy this.
First one ever.
So this is your extra little bit of Cake Drain throughout the day. So there is a disclaimer. This may or may not be daily. Depends on if we're able to do this daily. Also, if you have any ideas for suggestions, use hashtag Daily Scream, and we'll look into those on our next show.
Yes, we want to be able to answer your guys' questions on the show. We're going to be checking Twitter and Facebook and all the social medias for your questions and quotes, comments, all that good stuff.
All that and the other.
Because we want to shout out to you guys on every show and everything that we do.
Yep.
That we can.
Of course. So today we have something, this is a topic that's very near and dear to both of us, something that's been trending a lot lately, and that's the 80's.
Oh yeah.
The era of big hair, big movies, and big fun all around.
The decade that I should have grown up in.
The decade I was born in but didn't quite grow up in. I wish I did. Now this is the decade that brought us great classics as The Breakfast Club movie-wise, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, The Princess Bride, Gremlins,
Friday the 13th,
all great horror
Mad
titles,
Max,
all these great movie titles, and there's a recent movie that came out that took that 80s theme to the next level. It's called Kung Fury.
Yes, we finally watched the internet sensation Kung Fury. If you haven't seen it, it's a 30-minute short film on YouTube. Mm-hmm. God bless you.
Bless you.
And
you never know what's going to happen on this show, folks.
Anywho, we'll put a link to that, so you guys can go check out that movie. It's awesome. Throwback to 1980s cop movies specifically, and it really hits the nail on the head.
It does,
man.
Everything 80s wise is pretty much hit in this film, from like the dress style to even the action. Has a bit of that in there.
The music.
The music is amazing. It's mostly synthesizers and electric drums, and who doesn't love that?
Oh, I am a sucker for retro synth. I mean, speaking of retro synth, a lot of independent horror movies that are made nowadays really utilize that. I mean, Maniac, the remake with Elijah Wood, heavy on the synth. Also, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, acclaimed breakout movie. Outbreak. It's not about an outbreak.
It's itchy.
It's a very popular musical composition for new independent horror movies.
Oh yeah,
big time.
And a huge thing that came out of the 80s as well is a lot of the classic rock music that came out. I know a lot of metalheads or a lot of old guys are going to be like, 80s metal is horrible. No, think about it. Van Halen, you got Bon Jovi, Whitesnake, all the ones that
80s was like the birth of metal as we know it today.
Pretty much.
Metallica came out in the 80s. That
is very true. And there's also Judas Priest was 80s.
Yes, late 70s and the 80s.
Yes. So a lot of great bands' heydays were in the 80s, a lot of the classic bands, and as well as a lot of classic pop music. A lot of pop music today is inspired by that. They may not want to accept the fact.
Birth of pop also, with Michael Jackson being credited as kind of the king of pop.
King of R&B and pop.
Yes.
I know a lot of people out there, as soon as we say Michael Jackson, they're going to grimace and groan, but his music cannot be compared. He was an amazing artist, amazing singer, just all-around great dancer. Say what you will about him, but his music was amazing.
Yes.
Also, go back to, say, like the B-52s, even the one-hit wonders. All these great bands, bands nowadays can look back and say, they inspired me to get into music and even just to pick up a guitar or pick up a microphone and try this crazy thing we call music. And a lot of movies that inspired us came out in the 80s as well. Predator, I believe Alien was around the 80s, 70s, 80s.
The first Alien was 79, and Aliens was mid-80s, it was 84. So yeah, I mean, my whole life was probably impacted the most out of all the decades around that time. It's probably the 80s. I grew up watching 80s movies, listening to 80s music, and I was born in 93. And I was just kind of exposed to this stuff because, it was the things that my mom watched and listened to, and that had a huge impact on my childhood. The 90s culture didn't have a huge impact on me, despite my being born in it and growing up in it. But, yeah, love the 80s, man. Mm-hmm. People say, oh, how can you love the 80s? You weren't there, you don't know. I'm like, well, I kind of experienced the 80s through the art that came out in that period.
Very true. I mean, what better way to experience a time period than its art form? I mean, that's how a lot of people study the Renaissance and stuff like that, is through its art.
Yeah.
So why can't we look back at the 80s and say, this is great, therefore the 80s had a great impact on things. So it's good to do your research on these things. Look up your favorite musician. Maybe they started out in the 80s. Maybe they're, an 80s child like Kane and I are. Look into what inspired them. You may be surprised by that. So, and I know nowadays 80s is becoming more mainstream, which is really cool. Last Halloween I saw so many things that were Dayglow and Mesh. I thought my eyes were gonna turn inside out, but it was cool though, because it was like, hey, this is stuff that I like that's becoming more popular.
Yeah.
So and a lot of awesome video games came out in the 80s, like the classic arcade games.
Well, yeah, video games like as a pop culture mainstay, like we're born in the 80s.
Yeah, very true.
Arcades and Nintendo and all this stuff. 80s, man.
Yeah, and all you fashionable people out there who love... I just posted a vlog about going to the mall. The malls came out around the 80s, and that was kind of the thing to do. That's what made malls popular, was in the 80s. You live in a town, not much to do, you go to the mall. Yep. So that kind of made that, mall culture even more so. So, now it's more, everybody goes to the mall. But back then, the mall was kind of where teenage girls went to hang out and spend a lot of money. Not much different now, but guys go there too.
Well, yeah. I guess the period equivalent of a lot of money. Go to the mall, spend $5, come home with like 6 bags of stuff.
I wish it was that cheap in the 80s.
Exactly. And, but yeah, I see a lot of certain bits and pieces of like 80s fashion coming back. 90s a lot too.
Yes.
If you guys, wherever you're at, you probably have a mall, and in your mall, you probably have a Forever 21. And if you look at like half the stuff in this clothing store is 90s themed. It's crazy. I'm like, ugh, that's weird. I know the topic today is 80s, but
yeah, even in the speaking of topic, Hot Topic, which not a sponsor, but if you'd like to sponsor us, we would love to have you. They have a lot of 80s and 90s inspired stuff. They have a lot of 80s movie t-shirts. Target, also, if you'd like to be a sponsor, has a lot of 80s inspired clothing as well. So 80s pop culture is coming back in a big way, and I am super happy about that because, where else could you be weird and acceptable but in the 80s? Because nobody was normal in the 80s. Normal was weird.
Yeah.
So if you're into anti-normal, you're probably an 80s kid. You just gotta
admit it. And if you like
to
have fun.
And yes, 80s was full of fun stuff. You couldn't watch movies back then were all about just having fun in a movie theater. Even the ones that were kind of heavy had that light feel to them. I know it sounds really weird.
Didn't take themselves too seriously all the time.
They had a little bit of humor mixed in there, so you're like, okay, I can breathe a little bit. So a lot of the things that we've been talking about is 80s, and what I'd like to bring up is something that we are hugely inspired by. If you guys haven't seen our stuff on YouTube, is we love 80s horror films.
Oh yeah.
They've inspired us a lot. You can go to either extreme when it comes to horror films of the 80s. Earlier 80s weren't quite as gory or stuff like that. And then you have some of the more extreme ones throughout the decade as well. If you go to your local video store, you can find a ton of 80s slashers in the horror section. some of my personal favorites are like the Friday the 13th series. There are even some Halloween movies that came out during the 80s. Nightmare on Elm Street started back in the 80s. So a lot of great ones. Even some one-hit wonders horror-wise. Our personal favorite is The Burning. The Legend of Cropsey.
Yes.
Which is...
Very good.
If you haven't seen this, go out and get it like right now. If you're driving, go find a video store. Check this out.
Yeah, it's definitely very reminiscent of like Friday the 13th summer camp setting, but I think the thing that really separates it from Friday the 13th is just really well-developed characters. Friday the 13th was kind of first of its kind in the type of slasher that it was, and so it kind of set that standard. And then The Burning kind of took it, took that new setting, that new formula, and expanded on it, and gave it really strong characters and a really good villain at the same time. And awesome movie visually, and it's hilarious. Jason Alexander's in it, which is funny.
If you don't know who that is George Costanza from Seinfeld, the short bald guy. He had hair. If you can imagine George Costanza with hair, that's him in this movie.
Cute little afro on him.
Yeah, and the signature thing about this movie was the weapon that Cropsey uses. I mean, he uses a pair of hedge clippers. Yep. That's his main weapon.
Yeah, iconic and intense.
That's something that, you didn't see a lot, but also, made its mark, no pun intended. Whereas, you think, once you watch that movie, you see head clippers, like, oh, it's Cropsey.
Yeah.
Or, like Jason has his machete, Freddy has his glove, Cropsey had the big lawn shears.
Yeah, it makes you keep a closer eye on all of your all the gardeners and landscapers that you see.
They are crazy.
Yeah.
So, and even looking around our studio area, we have posters from, tons of different movies that either began, like the series began in that time, or were, continued through that time. Like Evil Dead 2 came out in like the early to mid 80s, I believe.
Well, and the first one came out in the 80s. It was filmed in 79, but it wasn't released in theaters until like 81. Wow. So, it's basically an 80s movie.
Pretty much.
But you mentioned kind of the gore of horror movies that developed in the 80s, but something that I'd like to point out about, like, gory, violent, whatever movies in the 80s was the fact that because the movies of the period were more lighthearted and campy, or a lot of people call it cheesy. I don't consider it cheesy. It's more
of course not.
It's more fun than cheesy. Cheesy to me is like unintentional, like you just made a bad movie. Mm-hmm. Whenever you make a fun movie, that's a different thing, because you're trying to, you're, like I said, you're creating a fun movie for people to enjoy, and so it makes the violence more separated, so it's not just this gratuitous, terrible, violent, torturous type of thing. It's all for fun.
Yeah.
You
need a good laugh in between a good kill.
Yeah, the intent is different.
Of course. And, one of the major big names of the 80s horror films was Tom Savini. This guy is an amazing makeup artist. If you've seen a lot of the Friday the 13th, he did work in that. He did, of course, The Burning. He's done,
Prowler.
The Prowler, the original Maniac. The Prowler, if you guys haven't seen it, that one's a good one to watch for if you're like us and love good makeup effects. That movie is one of those where you watch it and it's like whenever you watch a major magician, you're like, how on earth did they pull that off?
Yes.
It is the most intense kills and stuff like that you'll see on screen, makeup wise. And they're not this isn't CG, this isn't crazy editing, this is a practical effect and you're seeing it happen. So that's what made the 80s even cooler as well, was it's all practical. There's rarely CG at that time period. If it was, you could tell it was there for a purpose. It wasn't there mostly to enhance. It was there as like Tron is a good example of majorly CG back in the 80s with those effects.
Right, and of course, taking place inside of a computer game. It's appropriate. They didn't use it just because.
Right.
Nowadays you have that overusage of CG, but sometimes it's how you use the resources that you have. Because going back to Kung Fury that we mentioned, there's a lot of CG in this movie. and it's kind of it's lower budget CG. I mean, it's a short film funded through a very successful Kickstarter, and they used what they had very, very well, in my opinion. I mean, it looks way better than most of like the Sci-Fi Channel originals that you see. So, and those are studio funded feature length movies. So kudos to the makers of Kung Fury.
Yeah, these are unicorns.
Yes.
Is their name on YouTube.
Go subscribe to them on YouTube. And while you're on there, subscribe to us too. If you haven't already. But chances are if you're here, you've already subbed to us. But yeah, the 80s are coming back in a big way. I mean, even in video games.
The
Grand Theft Auto 5, if you haven't played that game, you need to go play that, and you need to watch us play it on YouTube.
Oh, of course.
It's definitely got a lot of throwbacks to the 80s, and the musical score is just great, and it's a throwback to action crime movies of the 80s. And Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, completely nostalgia bomb 80s themed video game. Throwbacks to RoboCop, Terminator, Aliens. It's just Predator. It's just amazing. Amazing game.
And a lot of online games now are going with that 80s theme with that. We've been watching videos of Lakeside Cabin.
Lakeview Cabin.
Lakeview Cabin. It's a 80s slasher game type of idea. They came out with a Kung Fury video game, which is very reminiscent of Streets of Rage, which was on the Sega Genesis back in the day.
Yeah.
Holla to the 16-bit people.
Holla!
So we were, this was the era of, that was great graphics at the time. Playing Double Dragon, and, the greatest achievement was like Star Fox, close to that. It was like early 90s era. But, back when games were simple and fun, it cost $0.25 to, blow up the universe.
Yes.
It was insane. It was a lot of fun.
And it was back, I mean, if anything, I think technological advantages have kind of spoiled us as a society whenever it comes to movies, whenever it comes to video games. The focus is on, well, this movie, it looks really great with all this super clear, super high-tech CG and quality, but then the quality, the substance of the film is really lacking, or the substance of the video game is really lacking, because all of the emphasis is on, it's in 4K, this many frames per second, all of this CG. But whenever you take it back and you look at the 80s, we have to just emphasize again, the emphasis of the time period for movies and just all kinds of art was fun. Everything was
very
about making something fun and enjoyable and positive.
Yeah. So, and
not just bombarding your senses with,
with
a lot of
50
fluff.
colors at a second. But my speaking of 80s and technology, you gotta throw out the fact that there were so many, struggles that you don't have nowadays, like tracking on a VHS tape. Whenever you think skipping on a DVD is bad, you watch tracking happen on screen. It gets staticky, wavy, the frames start moving. It gets very frustrating, but you stay glued to it. I mean, you have to do a head cleaner that took like an hour, but it made. But then again, it fixed it, and you were good to go. You can't really fix a scratched DVD. It was kind of like, well, we gotta tape it up and keep going.
Well, and then there was always that intense choice that you had to make is like, well, do I sit through all of the stinking previews and keep my tape pristine, or do I fast forward and then like permanently damage this part of my tape?
The struggle was real.
Yes, because if you fast forward that thing too many times,
the tape will stretch.
The tape is going to be kind of messed up for a while,
and you'll get this weird warble throughout the movie, which it's kind of hilarious, but at the same time kind of ruins your experience because you get that frustration of, why didn't I wait? But, even 80s TV back then was a lot of fun shows. Who's the Boss?
MacGyver,
which was basically a poor man's James Bond. He could, people joke a lot about MacGyver, but literally the guy could take a paper clip and a hairpin and make a bomb. The dude could, kill you with a pen.
Yeah, and the show didn't take itself too seriously. It wasn't like a lot of these modern shows that are just so uber serious. It's like, whoa, okay, you need to calm down. This is a television show. This isn't, you know.
I mean, if you wanted drama, they had a lot of family shows that dealt with issues, but usually there was always a special episode. Like, you know, this week on Family Matters, Steve Urkel is starting to use drugs. You know, it was like once in a blue moon. That was an example. Don't try to look up that episode. But, you know.
Urkel's like, I didn't never do no drugs.
But you gotta, you know, back then there wasn't shows like a Degrassi that I know of, or stuff like that where every episode was heavy. It was like really fun show. Then once in a blue moon, they'd be like an anti-drug message or you know, anti-alcohol message. There was something, you know, it was a lighthearted show. It had serious moments, but most of the time, it was a fun show you could watch with your family and not be too worried about what was going to happen.
Yeah, and it was very positive.
Very positive, very family-oriented time. And one show that's actually getting a sequel, a spin-off series, Full House, was major in like the 80s and 90s era. If you don't know what that is, then get out from underneath a rock and go buy the series, because you will love it.
It's a great
It's
show.
an amazing show. If you know the name Danny Tanner, then you know Full House. And the Olsen twins started out from literally baby to probably early teens on that show. So it's crazy to see how many people have grown up with that. Kirk Cameron's sister Candace grew up on that show as DJ, and a lot of, you know, great actors and stuff like that. And also, if you get a chance, look up Jesse and the Rippers. They were the band from that show that their Uncle Jesse was a part of, and I thought they were amazing. But I'm a nerd, and
Go John Stamos.
John Stamos is amazing, and he can still rock whatever hairstyle and look amazing.
Yeah, we did an episode of the Cake Drain show earlier this week, and it was about timelessly cool things.
How do we not mention John Stamos?
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. I was like, man, John Stamos should have been in that episode somewhere.
Somehow.
But that's all right. He gets a special place on our first podcast.
I don't care if he's in Full House or he's selling me Greek yogurt. I will hang out with that guy.
Yes.
I hope you guys have enjoyed our first podcast. Make sure you guys tweet us at Cake Drain and use hashtag Daily Scream. Give us suggestions on our next podcast, and maybe even a comment and a shout out, and we'll do that on the air.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys.
So we will talk to you guys next time. Peace out, and remember, BRUUUUUCE!